do. So this morning, as I mentioned earlier, we're continuing with the series that I started in January, and this week we're talking about empathy and how to have empathy without overwhelm. Because for so many of us, we don't seem to have an off switch when it comes for our empathy and compassion and doing for others. And as it turns out, you must. You absolutely must if you're going to be effective for others and for yourself. Because the old saying is so true, you cannot give from an empty well. And so it's important to know when you have given all that you should at that moment and you need rest yourself. But first, let's talk about what sympathy, compassion. Sympathy is typically the feeling of sorrow or pity at seeing someone's situation. You may feel that when you see a homeless person and your pity goes out to them, your sympathy. And then empathy is deep listening and understanding the emotions of the other person and even feeling and remembering when something like that may have happened to you. And compassion is the same thing, except it adds the element of how can I help? You take a proactive approach to alleviating the suffering of others. Sometimes the lines are blurred too between the empathy and compassion and the sympathy. And when we listen with empathy, as I said, it's why it reminded me of the prayer chaplain training, because we learn first to be still, create sacred space within, allow God, Spirit, to come into the situation, and then you be authentic. Be authentic. Be you. Be you. Let your guard down. Let your guard down and be the real you. Not stilted, not too humble, but just be you. Be still. Be open. Be gentle with the other person. I know also in grief support, one of the first things we learn is the person that's in grief, they don't need your advice. They really don't. They need you to listen. When they've had a terrible loss, all they need you to do is listen. And don't give advice, especially if you don't know what's going on with them or you've never had that experience. But the temptation sometimes is that when we're in conversation, and we all know this, we somehow feel like we need to say something, don't we? We just need to say something. And are you too cold, Debbie? Are you cold? We can turn. Okay, all right. Sorry. Didn't want to draw you out. I just want to make sure we don't have anyone too uncomfortable. We put the air on because when we got here this morning, it was already 75 in the room, and we needed to bring it down a bit. So isn't that unusual for February the 9th? And you have the air on, but we can raise it a couple of degrees if we need to. But when someone has experienced a loss, sometimes they just need somebody to listen to them. And they don't need advice, just to listen. Sometimes, and I've shared this with you at different times too, I've had friends, or maybe I've been the one that's had a friend, a close friend, and you've called your friend and said, would you pray with me? Would you pray with me? That's active empathy too. That's being there for another You don't need to say anything. You just need to create sacred space and be there for them. Ask a prayer. It doesn't need to be anything formal or big. Just, God, be with my friend now. She's suffering. She's hurting. She doesn't know if she can make it from one minute to the next. Would you be with her in her pain and her loss? And this can especially be true in times when someone has lost a partner, whether by death or divorce or separation, and their world can be turned upside down to the point that they don't know what they're going to do the next moment or how they're going to live through it. And having a friend that they can call, that they can talk to, and maybe, as I said, they don't need to say anything except pray for me, be there for me. And that's just how tough the situation sometimes with some of the personal pain that we can go through. And being that friend, being there for them, creating that sacred space, and that empathy, just being there for them, it's huge. It's huge. You might have a loss of a loved one, breakup. You may have a friend that has a problem at work, and they just want to talk it over with you. And then they may ask if you have any ideas or advice. And if you do, then share them, but listen compassionately. And here's something else that's critically important, okay? And that's one of the things that we learned in prayer chaplaincy, but it's also something that's important in our ethical being on this earth and relating to the others, and that is confidentiality. Confidentiality. If someone shares something with you and you're lovingly listening, and then you gently go away after praying with them, going your own way, you have the responsibility. You have a responsibility that is sacred. And that's a sacred trust that whatever was shared with you, you don't share it with anybody. It's confidential. A lot of people didn't learn that when they were growing up. Did you know that? Did you know that? I even heard of a lady that said, well, I don't want the board of directors talking about that because the next thing you know, there's going to be gossip. What? Gossip? From a confidential meeting? It hit me as odd when I heard the other person that had shared it with me. I thought, man, I don't know about that. All I know about is confidentiality, and that's in rooms and conversations that are not to be shared anywhere. They're sacred. That's a sacred trust. That goes beyond what even I was talking about here with empathy. People may forget what you told them. They probably will. Actually, they often do. They may even forget what you did for them. That happens too. But what they will never forget is how you made them feel. And if you're haughty and made them feel insignificant, guess what? That's what they're going to remember. If you didn't have time to listen to them, you were rushed, you were going from one place to another, the best thing to do in a situation like that is stop for a moment and say, you know, at this moment, I do not have time to go into this conversation. I can pray with you quietly. I can hold your hands. We can have a moment of silence, and then I can call you later and we can talk about that. But if someone truly wants to connect with you, they want you to listen, and you don't have time, the best thing might be to do that and say, I will hold you in prayer, and I love you, but at this moment, I need to run. I need to run. And if you're overwhelmed and don't have time for that later conversation, that's another matter too, and we'll discuss that in a moment. But how you made someone feel is something they will never forget. Never. In a work environment, if a coworker tried to make you feel stupid because they could feel better about themselves. Anybody ever had that happen? No, of course not. Even a teacher. It happens. A classmate. We know when we were kids how the children in school, I mean, it's what they do, isn't it? They don't seem to know any better, and they just seem to do that to each other. And we're just praying that we'll be a good influence on them and teach them not to do that with each other. I just hate to read. One of the things I hate is to read about bullies anywhere, really, and especially with children in school. Such a terrible thing to happen. So we just, we pray, and we pray that we'll raise our children to have empathy with others and not to do that to another child or anybody. I'll never forget, I went into a workplace, and for some reason the manager's little boy was there, and it was a big place. It was a factory, and at that time it was one that I had some involvement and can't remember exactly what it was, but the little guy, he may have been 5 years old, and he stood up real blustery. He says, "You know, my dad is the boss here, and he tells everybody what to do." And the little kid tried to emulate that. I noticed that as I was there. He was walking around to the receptionist's desk, and I thought, man, your dad's not a very good role model, is he? I remember thinking that very thing. Our children are watching us. They're watching us, everything they do. And I would assume that little boy, too, turned out to be just like his role model dad, wouldn't you think? Wouldn't you think? I don't have much time for someone that's a bully. I sure don't. People will never forget how you made them feel. I was thinking about that yesterday, and it reminded me of a blog post, and I placed a copy of the blog post. I printed a few copies of it and put it on the back table just in case you'd like to read it. My blog is soul2soul.blog. And I place something on it, I don't know, every so often, not every week, or maybe sometimes twice a week, but whenever I feel like it. And it was, I told some friends at a board meeting the other day, I laughed, and on Friday I said, well, when I was thinking about what I was talking about today, I remembered a quote. And I remembered the quote, and it was, Grace will pull up a chair and sit with you. And actually, that's the title of the blog post that I had written. And so I was looking for, who's that quote from? Who was that quote from? Because I wanted to quote them today. And so as I did a search on it on Google, I found that I was the one that said that. It was attributed to me. And I was just so impressed. I didn't know what to say. I said, wow, that lady got my attention. But I wrote this little blog post, and that was the title of it. Grace will pull up a chair and sit with you. And in the blog post, it was August 19th, 2022. And what had happened that summer was that we had a speaker that particular Sunday, and I had the week off and felt like I really needed to do something. We had a whole lot of activity at our house. My husband was totally rebuilding it, which is what he always does when we buy a house. He rebuilds it, then we sell it. And then he buys another one and rebuilds it, and we've done that for years and years. It's our normal, okay? Everybody else may have been in a house for 20 years. Good for you. I think that's great. He enjoys rebuilding. I enjoy decorating it. And so it's been a good thing for us to do. But from now on, he's not selecting any more big houses because I'm over it, okay? I'm over it, okay. So he had all this construction going on. He had taken down walls. I don't know how many walls, but the house is much better for it. And so I said, you know what? I'm just going to go do something different because I wasn't needed, and I don't like being there with all that stuff going on. So I noticed there was a cruise going out of Mobile, and I had never been on a cruise at that time. I said, well, I think I'm just going to take myself on a cruise. I need that experience. I need to learn how you do this. I like to learn how to do things like that. If it's going overseas, international somewhere, flying somewhere by myself, I like to learn. How do I do this? Where do I park? How do I go in? How do I find my way? Then, all about it. So I just wanted to experience that, and I did. And it was only about 4 days. It went to Cozumel, and that was fascinating. But the reason I wrote the blog post was that I had signed up from this little side trip when we were stopped in Cozumel, and we were going out to some Mayan ruins. And I was excited about seeing that. And there was a group of maybe 12 of us, and we had gone on a little bus, and we got there, and pretty quickly when we went out of the gate, I saw that there was another woman. It was an older woman, and she had a cane, and she was hobbling, and we were hardly even onto the uneven ground. Rocks, and you could see the terrain you were going to be walking on, and we came to the first stopping place, the first ruins, and I observed her, and so I went and sat with her while they were describing the ruins there at that particular spot. And she said, I just can't go on. I'm just going to have to go back to the entry gate and sit there while everyone goes on to see the ruins. It wasn't a long tour, maybe 45 minutes or so. And I made a quick decision right then and there that I was going back with her, because the empathy in me said, this woman needs a friend. And the way she was walking, I wasn't even convinced with her cane that she could get back to the entry gate. And so as they went on, we bid them farewell, told them to have a good time, and I walked back with her. And we sat at the entry gate where they had refreshments. We got some lemonade, and I thought, so what about the Mayan ruins? They'll always be there. I can go back. If I really want to see that, I can go another time. But you know what? You do regret. You do regret if you didn't help somebody in their moment of need. It could have been me. It could have been the other way around. And I would hope that someone would do the same thing. I know they did with my mother and other elders that I saw that needed care, and I hope others would do that too. So when we got back to the cruise port, I even volunteered, although I like to walk, and I walk at least 2 miles a day. I voluntarily got in the little buggy to be carried back to the port because I wanted her to feel okay. I wanted her to feel like this was an okay experience. That's why I wrote the blog post, and I had read an article or a chapter in a book by Brene Brown. The name was Daring Greatly. She shares about a time in graduate school where she was just a professor left a lasting impression on her. She was so self-conscious. She felt like everyone else was above her. She felt like the professor, if she turned in her work, her writing, that all she would get back would be criticism. And she was so surprised when she sat at a table with the professor, and the professor was so kind. She pulled up a chair and discussed her work with her, didn't criticize, just gave her a few things that she might improve. She said it really, really touched her, and she would never forget how that made her feel, and she wanted to pass that on. So that's all I'm really conveying to you today, is how we can help others. Now, the other thing I said that I was going to talk about was that when we do have that gene within us, though, that compassion and empathy gene, and we want to help others, we can get overwhelmed if we do too much. We can become overwhelmed if we're a teacher. We can become overwhelmed if we're a minister. We can become overwhelmed if we're a neighbor. Whatever it is that we do, certainly in the nursing profession and the medical profession, they can become overwhelmed. And when you do, you need to recognize it and stop and give yourself some rest. Maybe you're going through a certain time and you're fighting your own battles with health. You need to unvolunteer yourself from everything, is what you first need to do. And recognize that you're the one. You're the one that needs the healing right now. And the others will be okay, because we know in this world that where there is a need, another will step up. And we claim that. We know it to be true. So this morning, I thank you for coming out on Super Bowl Sunday and spending it with us. What a beautiful thing to do. We enjoy having people here at Unity of Gulfport. We feel like you'll come because you want to hear the spiritual teachings, you want to hear the lovely music, and we know that you'll come back for the fellowship and the spiritual growth. I hope you'll have a beautiful day and a beautiful week. Thank you for your time.